This episode was filmed away from our traditional studio. It is not a traditional recording. Viewer discretion is appreciated.
Hi everybody, and welcome to today's on-location episode of the Jeff Heilman Project. I'm Jessica Heilman, and we're seated here with Jeff Heilman and Teddy Heilman for his first ever appearance on the Jeff Heilman Project. We are going to sit and we're going to actually tell the story. We promised you a few weeks ago that we would sit and have Teddy here for story time, and Dad would tell us again the story of how he went from, living on your own as everybody, all of us hopefully, or start out living with somebody. And then we have to graduate from living at home with our parents or grandparents or whomever our caregiver is to living on our own. And I remember Teddy expressing that he was especially interested in being able to hear that story on how you went from living with your parents and then kind of migrating and becoming an adult. But before we get started with the story, I think that we should talk about how our week has been. How's your week, Teddy?
It was good. We went to Scott's, and
We have a fan named Scott.
And we go to play board games with mostly Catan.
And did you play any of the games this time, or was it mostly the bigger kids?
Yeah, Andrew won twice.
Andrew won Catan twice. So.
Yeah.
And what about you, Mr. Heilman? How was your week?
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on at work. Contracts getting written, new accounts getting turned over to me. Some older accounts that weren't happy are getting happy. So, yeah, we're doing all our stuff. I was really sick, sinus infection or something. So my voice is starting to come back. I'm probably 80% right now. But I had 2 quarterly business reviews, one that was 2 days on Monday and Tuesday, and a third with a customer on Wednesday. And so anybody that knows quarterly business reviews, you're working for weeks and weeks and months to get ready for those. And I had to deliver boom, 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 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then so today is Thursday. We executed on QBRs yesterday with a customer, and then jumped in the car and drove down here to Central Valley, California, and there's a great spot. We're not sponsored by Harris Ranch, but you should go. You would love it. There is a pool. If you have kids, if you are in Northern California and you want to be able to swim and have it be 85 degrees outside and sunny, but do it in March or April, you can do it here at Harris Ranch in Coalinga. So we're staying in one of the guest suites, and there's a beautiful pool. It is, what kind of architecture is this? Ranch? Cowboy, Mexico.
It's like
ranch.
Pueblo. It really
Pueblo.
feels like San Diego circa 1920, 1930 Pueblo. San Diego, Rio Del Mar, or something like that. But the architecture with the tile roof and the Spanish style.
Fabulous.
And not to mention the food in the restaurant. Is that?
Oh, yes. And they have between 80,000 and 100,000 head of cattle on their 30,000 acre ranch. So they get USDA prime.
You have to take the good with the maybe not so smelling good when the winds blow a certain way.
Depends on the wind.
It definitely, you're reminded that you are on a cow ranch, but
on a ranch.
it didn't stay like that the whole time, right, Teddy?
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on the wind.
Yeah, and it only gets stinky a little bit of the day. Well, so as far as what kind of questions, Teddy, did you have for Dad before we get into Dad telling his story? What part did you want to make sure that we recorded and that you could play back later or tell other people about?
I like the part where he met, either when he meets Chris or when the tennis game starts.
A tennis game.
The tennis match.
What about the tennis match?
The tennis match in your mind where
Oh, the tennis match. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, either that or when you meet Chris.
Okay.
I think it's the tennis match.
All right. Well, meeting Chris helped me. Before meeting Christopher, there wasn't any tennis match going on. I was just watching life go by. But okay, I'll make sure and include that. What else?
Yeah. The whole story was good.
If I can tell a story to an 11-year-old, that's a good thing. We don't want to be able to.
It's over 42 minutes.
Well, part of
Jessica's our moderator, so she'll keep us on track.
part of what I would like for anybody who's listening or anybody who's watching to be able to do is open up the dialogue between you and your kids. Open up the dialogue between maybe your kids and coming and sitting and watching this with you and seeing an 11-year-old who's interested in how their parents became who we are, being able to document it. We both have grandparents who've since passed away, and how valuable it would have been to be able to sit them down and say, tell us the story, and document it on audio through the video platform in order to be able to have that story to be passed down and just continue to be able to, from their own mouths, being able to tell their story. So when I met your dad, Teddy, your dad was 21. He was 21 years old, so he was only 10 years older than you. Can you believe that? So he was 21. He was living, at that time, he was living with Grandpa Jim and Grandma Kat. And he did not have a job, but it wasn't because he was unemployed. It was because of his in-between jobs. So he had a job, but then he was going to start another job. So he had his own car. When he picked me up, he was wearing a suit, and he brought flowers when he picked me up from Grandma Carol's house, because I was at Grandma Carol's at the time. And he said to me, I don't have any money. So he was honest. He was right from the beginning. He said, I don't have any money, but I can still take you out and show you a good time. And so I said, you know what? I like that. I appreciate that. He's being honest that he doesn't have a lot of bucks to spend, but he is saying he could still take me out. Like, that wasn't a limitation. And that kind of set up the whole moving forward of what I would come to expect, what I would come to believe on, that dreams and having a vision of being able to have that money wasn't going to be a limiting factor on me having a good time and being able to have a good time in our life. And I hope that as our kid, you can feel that too, that if you say, hey, mommy, daddy, is there any way I could do this? Or I'd really like to be able to do this. There haven't been very many times when we've said no. We've always said maybe, and if the time is right, and we'll look into it, we'll see. There's always been a we'll see, but there's very rarely been a no, that's not going to happen. Do you feel that to be true?
Yeah.
Yeah? So, Mr. Heilman, would you care to elaborate on where you were at when maybe before where you were at, before, what got you to the point to where you could confidently say, I don't have any money, but I can still show you a good time. Yeah. Because that's quite a transformation from, 19-year-old Jeff pre-meeting Christopher Johnson.
Yeah. I would say, I guess we'll just start at the beginning.
Sure.
So I was born in 1974 from two hippie parents. My dad had a degree from Carnegie Mellon University, which is even now, it's really, really high level math. But back then, MIT was pretty big deal, but Stanford didn't have the computer science stuff that they've got now. And there was Rensselaer, which
I feel like MIT is still a pretty big deal.
Oh, MIT is still a big deal for sure. But Carnegie Mellon, Rensselaer, MIT, those are among the very top level physics and chemistry schools back before computer science, or kind of at the burgeoning of computer science. So my dad had an engineering degree, and that changed our ability to feed ourselves because he could always get a pretty decent paying job and allow my mom to stay home. My mom dropped out of University of New Mexico after one semester because she felt like she was wasting her parents' money. She didn't know why she was going to school. So she moved back, and in the summer of 1971, my mom's waiting tables at a big boy restaurant, which would be my favorite place to eat, ironically, later on. And
And that's a burger joint where the statue out front is holding a platter of burgers.
And I'll have Andrew put
Bob's Big Boy.
I'll have Andrew put a picture of Bob's Big Boy, the logo for Bob's Big Boy.
Where will it be?
In the YouTube. It'll be in the YouTube. Oh, it'll probably be down below in the comments, or maybe right in the middle of the screen right there. We'll see. But we'll get you a picture of Bob's Big Boy. And so 71, they meet. They end up moving in together and moving to California. My dad had plans to move from the East Coast. My mom was in Dallas. My dad grew up outside of Pennsylvania, small town off of Interstate 80 in Clarion, Pennsylvania, where my grandfather actually used to teach. So we come from, highly educated, middle class, East Coast stock for the most part. My grandfather on that side was from Pennsylvania. My grandmother was from Poland. My grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side were from Evansville, Indiana, and Albuquerque. So in 1975, I come along, and I have a kid brother, Tim, born in 1977. And we had, basic childhood. I mean, my dad worked, my mom stayed home. We didn't really know we weren't well-to-do financially, but he always had some sort of an engineering job, made enough money to get by. And then in I want to say 83 or 84, somewhere in there, my parents separated, ended up divorcing. And that was a really impactful situation that tore our family in half, put my brother and me kind of against, with my brother and me together, we would have to fight, or we would, play the parents against each other to try to get our needs met because they weren't on the same page, because they weren't together anymore. And by, I think I entered high school in 1989, so we're jumping ahead there a ways. But 1989, I did not have a good self-image. I'd never been to church in my life.
You may not have had a good self-image, but you have an excellent memory, considering the fact that you can remember every single teacher that you've ever had, all the way back to kindergarten.
I can remember every single...
It's always amazing to me.
Every single first and last name of every single teacher I had, I think, until I got out of high school. So I liked people. I never cut class. I was an A student in almost everything, and then a B or C student in the things that I didn't like. But from the time I was in first grade, I got put in Mensa and GATE, Gifted and Talented Education, and ELP, which was extended learning. And they would always try to push me into upper grades, try to get me advanced, or try to get me, kindergarten, try to get me to skip to first, or try to get me to skip to second, try to get me to skip to third. And I didn't, I probably could have done okay, but I was a little bit older than the rest of the kids just because my birthday falls in December. But I got this kind of reinforcement from school at an early age that I was really smart. And I also kind of got this complex that I could get out of doing the work. I was smart enough to get out of doing the work. And so first, second, and third grade, I was at the off-campus site for Gifted and Talented Extended Learning in Mensa. And then in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, somehow, and I don't really remember, they had a computer. They had a Macintosh computer that came out in, must have been 83 or 84. And they had one at the computer in the office. And they said, well, we need a school newspaper. Why don't we have Jeff write the school newspaper? So I'm like, all right, I get to get out of class for another 3 years. And I just wrote the school newspaper for 3 years. And that got me started writing. It's got me started using a computer.
So it was in essence your first newsletter.
Yeah, it was my first form of social media in 1983 on a Macintosh, which was all printed. We had to have it printed. I don't even know how you couldn't email it. We didn't have email. So from that, I ended up kind of feeling elite because of my academia, my academic status, and I didn't get phenomenal grades, but I got pretty good grades and I didn't do much work. And then I basically tapped out of 7th and 8th grade by being a cabin counselor. People were like, we've never had somebody want to be a cabin counselor as much as you do, I was
a cabin counselor during
sixth grade camp. No, during the school year.
They had camp during.
They used to. They had money. California schools in the 80s had money.
They had camp in the school year.
Yeah, in the middle school year, they had sixth grade science camp. They'd go send you into the woods for 3 or 4 days. So I got to do that a bunch as a cabin counselor. Got to get out of school doing that. And by the time I was in high school, I figured out a way to I could get a I don't know how I got a work permit at 14, but I got a work permit at 14. As long as it was signed off by the school, I could do it. I could work very limited hours, and I got high school credit for doing my day job. And I dropped all my classes, so I only had 4 classes.
Okay, so let me ask you, looking back,
Yeah.
would you advise your children to avoid, like, do what you did and, like, avoid all of that? Or was there some learning that you think that you could have benefited from had you not avoided the whole...
I think that if we take the blinders off, there's 2 main drivers why people put their kids in school in the first place. And I don't necessarily think I'm smarter than other people, but I do tend to ask questions that most people are like, you shouldn't ask those. We don't want people to ask those questions. Don't ask those questions. Those aren't questions people want asked. My question is like, why do we go to school in the first place? And there's really 2 reasons. One, parents need to work to pay bills, and they need free daycare. And that's, I would say on the financially struggling, that's a real reason. Like, you have free daycare 5 days a week that allows a second parent to go and work and earn money.
Well, I think that more correct would not necessarily be to call it daycare, but maybe, kids need a place to go.
Well, whatever you want to call it. Daycare for somebody that's old enough that Lincoln Logs aren't going to get it done, right? So you need books and crayons when you're 6 and 7. And then you need books with smaller font and less pictures when you're 8 and 9 and 10.
I guess my question is, like, it sounds like there was some beneficial processing that you could have learned about how to do the process.
Beneficial processing.
Just how John Maxwell says that too often we overestimate having gotten there, and we underestimate the process.
I thought school was a game that I played to win, and the way that I win is get out of doing as much as I possibly could. So for that, it was great. It was a great way of learning politics. Mm-hmm. It was a way of learning how to get out of doing work.
I agree.
It was a great way of learning how to get other people to do your group projects for you.
4-hour work week, baby.
Yeah, 4-hour work week starting at age 9. Like, it was that was my benefit. I think the other reason that people put their kids in school is because they are terrified that if they don't, let's say that mom stays home. I've never really understood, like, mom stays home and she takes 3 or 4 kids to school. Like, that sounds so hard to me versus just teach them how to read yourself. She knows how to read, right? She knows how to do math or can figure out how to do math, or the kids can figure out how to do math from their parents. And, but they do it, right? Moms that stay home and take their 3 kids or 4 kids to school, nothing wrong with that. But I've always thought, like, why do they spend 6 or 8 hours every single day in school learning something that you could pick up with flashcards in 45 minutes a day? Just by repetitive, just if you know how to learn, if you know how to think. So it just seems like an exceptionally long period of time spent learning very little that actually applies.
Well, one could argue in the defense of what
what everybody is afraid.
One could argue.
Let me back up for a second. There's 2 reasons why I think people put their kids in school. 2 main reasons.
Okay.
One is, 3 reasons really. One is they need free daycare for kids after they're 5 or 6. They're old enough to leave at home, but you need a place to put them, right? Second reason is everybody else does it. So why would you want to not do what everybody does? And my whole thought is, if everybody's doing it, something's wrong. If everybody does exactly the same thing, like if everybody does, with the exception of maybe driving on the right side of the road, if everybody does something, it's probably not a very good idea. In my mind, just my normal brain, my weird brain says, if everybody does something the same way, it probably something wrong with that. But most people don't think like that. Most people think we just do what everybody else does. The third reason is, and I think this is where we start to get into some of the immigrant populations who buy houses based on, they have really, really high standards in immigration. Immigrants, in my opinion, have very high standards for education. And I'm not picking any particular countries. I'm just saying they have higher standards than Americans have a lot of the time. And they tend to find areas that have really demanding school systems, and that tends to drive the property values up in those areas. Well, public school, if you are really aggressive about education and almost like not mean-spirited, but like serious beyond what a 7-year-old, ought to have to deal with, a lot of times it comes from a belief that like, this is how you get out. This is how you get out of poverty. This is how we got to this country, when we became educated. And another country came over here, got a visa because a company wanted really sharp, really well-educated people. And that personal growth and education is the way. And you're going to starve to death if you don't do this. Now, people don't talk about that. But I think that underlying driving fear of starvation and death drives a lot of people to push their kids really hard in the school system. And, whatever they're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing anybody, but I don't have a fear of death. I know how to raise my kids. I know how to read, and I know how to do math. And I want to spend time with them, and you're home, and I work from home. So with that equation, it's like, what would I do with my kids? I do exactly what we did. I homeschool.
And this is what I was going to say about, one could argue, do you think that we robbed our kids the opportunity to learn the politics? You became who you are today because of your ability to get out of doing the classes and to play the game and to do all this stuff. Like, do you think because they did not have that opportunity to figure it out like you did, do you think that could have, that could set them back from what you were able to do?
Set them back?
Like because you became who you are, and your disdain for, having a job, and you became an entrepreneur. Like, you learned because it became ingrained on how to play the game and how to do the system because you were in it. And you're a way to avoid staying in it and being kept in it, partly because you were in it. And our kids never were in it and have never had that, that beat down that you feel like you
I don't think
that
I don't think the beat down is what made me what I am. I think that self-image made me what I am. And I think that we've given our children we've given our children a Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Hearst.
What do you think about being homeschooled versus going to a public school or going into a classroom?
I like it, but whenever people say, "Oh, what grade are you in?" I'm like,
I don't know. I'm 11.
Well, they're asking a question based on what they see, right? They see a young person, they think, what grade are they in? Yeah. And that's because almost everybody goes to a traditional form of public school or private school, mostly public, and a handful of people are homeschooled. But I always felt like the times that I enjoyed the most when I was a kid was traveling with my parents. Was going and visiting new places and seeing libraries and buildings and architecture and bridges and oceans and rivers and cities around the world with my parents. That was my education that I enjoyed.
Unfortunately, at the time we were in the system still had funds, and especially
California public schools were top of the world.
We had field trips and museums, and there were lots of
we had summer camp
to go places.
We had trips, 8th grade trip to Yosemite for a week. We had
senior graduation was like Great America, like we all went to the whole graduating class.
Football team had brand new uniforms and top equipment. That you would get, the most expensive equipment, and the band had instruments, and the art classes had material supplies, paper, canvases, paints. Like, you had all that stuff when we grew up. You didn't have parents having to pony up to fundraise so that your kid could play high school marching band. And that's just a function of economics, right? The public school system, at least in California, is bankrupt. And as a result, they have to somehow figure out a way to keep the system going, so they lean into the parents, which is fine. But, it's not, let's not think it's free, right? It's not free education.
So you get your first job at 14, and you worked at a place Teddy would have really liked.
I worked at a chocolate
shop.
A chocolate store.
A chocolate candy store.
They're basically, it was owned by these two women who were, I think it was a mother and a daughter owned the business, and they were nice, and they paid me $4 an hour, I think, or $4.25 an hour, which I think was minimum wage. And I was a janitor, and I used to clean the big vats. I would clean out those vats, almost like a dishwasher. Janitor's like a glorified title. I was really a dishwasher. And I would scrub the floor and keep everything clean, and that was my first job. And I remember my first paycheck was like $53. And I was like, that's like 3 months worth of allowance from mowing the lawn, edging the lawn, doing the dishes every night. And I was like, this is great. And that was my first idea that you could actually get leveraged income out of being a part of a business versus, just bumming money off your mom and dad. So, but I had a horrible self-image. I was the only kid in my school that I thought anyway, whose parents were divorced. And I felt like there was something wrong with me because I couldn't keep my parents together as much as I tried. And that was devastating.
It's interesting. When we grew up, everybody's parent owned houses. Like it was pretty rare for me to have a friend who lived in an apartment.
Yeah. We lived in an apartment after my parents.
They might not have had big houses. It might have been little 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, little, California bungalows, but they had houses. They owned houses. It was pretty rare.
Everybody I knew lived in a rental house or a house that they owned. Pretty much all my friends' parents. So really never had. I had friends. I had lots of friends. I played a lot growing up. We lived in a different world. It was an entirely different universe.
You rode your bike.
Rode our bike around the neighborhood.
You didn't worry about your bikes getting stolen. You just left them on the front yard.
Yeah, my bikes were stolen, but
it was always by somebody you knew.
We find it again at school anyway. Like, you got to ride the bike to school you stole yesterday.
We shared.
And rode my bike to school, played with my friends, did a lot of homework, which that was the other thing. Like, you spend all day in school. What do you need homework for? Like, why didn't you get it done in the class that they were supposed to be teaching, right? So you got to do homework. And I tried really hard to do all the homework, especially math. I excelled at math and science and reading and history. I just loved those subjects. And I love school. I never cut class because I liked being around people. And I had a lot of fun with that. But school just wasted an incredible amount of time in my childhood that I could have spent learning a trade or working or building a company. But it was what we did. My dad was working, my stepmom was working, and my mom and stepdad both had jobs. So you had to do something with the kids, right? Hence the free daycare. And then I went through a series of jobs. I got fired a lot because I had, bad attitude and I didn't really know how to work with people. And then to Teddy's point, I met a guy in 1994 in August. A friend of mine, I talked to him today, and we talk all the time. It's been 30 years now.
We called him on the drive to Harris Ranch.
That's right. We drove down to Harris Ranch, and we called Christopher. He's a good friend of mine, and we've gone back and forth in different businesses. Chris Johnson was the best man at my wedding. He was on the podcast, probably episode 7 or 8, pretty early on. He's about 6 or 7 years older than me, and we met. I was working at the Gap folding clothes, and he was dressed really well, like in a suit and tie and polished Ferragamo shoes on, a tie pin, nice watch.
That's another thing that's changed over time. Kids that are watching this, whatever year you're watching
People notice how you dress.
Well, no, people used to wear suits. Used to be dressed up. Right now, suits are not. I mean, like, you don't show your wealth by wearing a suit and tie now. That's like you show your age. Now it's
or you're from Japan.
Now it's like
if I see a group of guys, like a group of guys in suits, they're almost always from Japan because they wear suits over there. They still dress up.
Now,
and
if
have
you're
a lot
wearing
of
like
self-respect for attire.
or if you're wearing Armani, or if you're wearing Ferragamo, like branded clothes, now that's like successful. Like,
I can't think of any time where you see a group of guys in suits, unless you're, financial district in New York is probably the only time, or sometimes like in London, financial district in London, you'll see guys in suits. Other than that, almost never.
But when we were 20 years ago, you see a guy wearing a suit and you want to know what that guy does for a living.
Yeah.
Now you see a guy wearing those oh my gosh, what's his name? That new Louis Vuitton, he did Pharrell. If you see somebody wearing Pharrell Louis Vuitton sunglasses, you want to know what that guy does for a living.
That's right. It's become about the accoutrement.
It is definitely the accoutrement and less about the articles of clothing.
And so I met Christopher and we just hit it off. We got it off really well. He seemed like a cool guy, like a guy that people buy from or want to do business with or want to hang out with, people that are like you or that you like or want to be like. And so I looked up to this guy, and we sat down, he called me, and we set up a coffee meeting. I'd never met anybody for coffee before. That was next level. Like, I'd only turned, I think I was 18 or 19, so I couldn't drink yet. We met for coffee at a place called Cafe Adria. I don't even think it's there. It's on the Safeway. It's in the little shopping center. And the Safeway that's on the corner of Bollinger and Wolf Road, it turns into Miller at Bollinger. There's a little coffee shop there, Cupertino. And we met, and he basically said, you're a good looking kid. You're hardworking. You got a good attitude. I don't know if any of those things were true. But I'm going to help you. And he handed me a couple of books to read, and I think some Tony Robbins tapes, and he started coaching me, and he started to invest in me. And I made a list last night of the guys who invested in me, and there's 14 of them. My dad and my grandfather are 2 of them, but Christopher was one of the early guys who invested. It was more than just a mentor. He was a backer. He was an investor. This guy would have been a private equity funder who wanted me to be the CEO of one of his stable horses as the CEO of one of his businesses. And at the age of 19, he showed me how to tie a tie and showed me how to shine my shoes. And he was, he was married to a gal at the time that, he was kind of lonely. He didn't have any kid brothers. He worked really hard in his day job. He didn't have a lot of friends. And he's super smart. I was super smart. And we were like a 6 or 7 year age gap. And so he took me under his wing as his fraternity younger brother in this world of sales and business. And as a result of that, you were talking earlier about the concept of the tennis match. All of a sudden, I started reading books about successful people, biographies, and he got me reading How to Win Friends and Influence People and Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude by Napoleon Hill and W. Clement Stone.
You can if you think you can.
Can if you think you can by Norman Vincent Peale, and Self-Love, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it got me reading. And all of a sudden, this almost holographic tennis match shows up in my consciousness to where I'm watching my parents send this tennis ball over the net saying, "You'll never be anything." And then something from the book would hit the ball back on the other side. You can if you think you can. And then my stepbrothers would say, "You'll never have a Ferrari," tennis match goes over. And if I can think it, I can do it. And all of a sudden you see this tennis match going back and forth. And pretty soon it got to the point where it was like, everything that people told me I couldn't do, there was an answer for. And I started to believe over a couple of year period of time, you mentioned that I can take you out even though I didn't have a lot of money. That belief of like, wait a minute, I'm starting to hit resistance here as a young person, but I'm hitting resistance that has always been there. But now I've got this bolstering belief of these phrases and ideas and stories and allegories throughout all of human history that's becoming real in my life. And I started to come into my own as an adult. And I think most people do that in their late 20s. And most people come from a pretty good self-image and a pretty good upbringing. I had a really rough upbringing. I did not have a good self-image. And all of a sudden, I started to play catch-up. So I could see that I was having friends that would go to Yale. I had friends that went to all the Ivy League schools. Yale and Princeton and Columbia and Dartmouth and Brown and Harvard and Penn. And they would go to University of Pennsylvania. They would go to these great schools, and then they would get these great jobs coming out of school, and they would start making money right away. And I'm like, God, number one, I don't know if I want to work that hard. Number two, I don't think I like school that much at all. Number three, even if I got out, I'd still have a prison sentence of a job So I don't know that that was the path for me.
I think that you bring up a really good point, and I want to clarify that your parents didn't necessarily say you'll never be anything. It was always a condition. If you don't do this, you'll never be anything, right? Like if you don't go to college, you'll never be anything. And it's all it was very legalistic.
It was very legalistic.
And when people who are not, people don't tap into the ability to recognize vision and letting your vision overtake the circumstances, you become very pigeonholed into circumstances, and your circumstances state, well, of course, if you don't get straight A's, you're never going to amount to anything. If you don't make your bed every single morning, you're never going to be disciplined.
It wasn't. Here's something to all you parents out there. God bless you for having kids. It's so hard. It is so much work. If you haven't had kids yet,
it's hard being a kid because it's hard being a parent.
Get ready. It is so much work to be a parent. But what I would say is that if you don't continue to dream as a parent and encourage your children to dream and to accomplish the things that are important to them, if you want your kid to be a doctor, God bless you. I hope they become a doctor. I hope they make you happy. I hope they make you proud. But if your kid doesn't want to be a doctor and they want to be something else, and we push them to be what we want them to be, to try to live out our dreams and goals, that's
he's nodding his head.
And Debbie's like, no, that's not what I want to do. If you don't outdream your kids, pretty soon they're going to find other mentors to look up to.
Yeah, your stepbrothers 100% would have said you'll never get a Ferrari. But I know your parents. Yeah. Your parents just were very.
I think my parents said you can do whatever you want. But my mom was good. She was like, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. I don't care.
Yeah. As long as 18 years old is coming up right around the corner. And
she was good. I mean, but my stepdad was more competitive with him. Yeah. He was like, you're not going to do as well as me. I'm like, don't set the bar too high there, pal. And then my dad was like, you have to go to college. And that was not like you have to go to college like it's a good idea. You have to go to college because I have money saved for you. It was like, my religion is college. And if you don't go to university, and he literally told me one time, he was like, you can take any kind of advanced engineering degree that you want as long as it's chemistry or physics at the foundation. And I was like, what? Those are my only two options. I'll probably find out something else to do because the only physics I want to deal with is checking out that girl's physique over there. And the only chemistry I'm interested in is at the bottom of a can of beer. So I am absolutely not on board with that program. And because I was making money early, I saw a way out. I was like, wait a minute, I can buy my way out of the prison sentence that is living at home with these guys. And I pushed the needle on that for a while. And eventually I dropped out of school and my dad said, I'm Teddy's of a rim, but I'll basically make it G-rated. He just basically suggested that I found another
place to live.
Domicile.
I know how to
suggested it with, force. And that was it. And that was pretty much the last, really decent time that I was on good footing with my dad. And so I'm out on my own, living in my car, living on friends' couches, crashing on beds in bedrooms where I could find them, and working at the mall. I was in sales at the mall selling health equipment, and I made about $2,500 a month. Maybe Andrew could put the calculation for what that would be in today's dollars, but it was enough that I could actually survive. Gas was like $1.20 a gallon. And so I kind of bounced around from city parks, friends' couches, bedrooms that I could crash in somebody's place for a while. And I did that for a few months and lived on my own. And then my dad let me move back in. I don't know why. I don't remember what the conditions were, but it was really tense. And that was when I got the job working for Elon and Kimball. It's basically a summer job. Answer a 2x2 ad in the newspaper. Internet sales call here. They'd been in business a month. And so I get that job. And then when they ran out of money, I think their mom and dad gave them like 10 or 15 grand. When they ran out of that money, And I was the biggest expense was their payroll. They're like, we can't make payroll for a couple months, but we're going to raise some money. We'd love to have you stay on if you can. But things were so tense with my dad that I was like, I can't tell my dad that I lost my job. He just let me move back in. So.
And plus, it was a different time. I mean, it was the Valley before
there was
a
no
new
such
startup
thing as a
company
startup.
every 2 days.
The word startup hasn't even been invented yet at that point.
Because there was hardly any internet.
So,
at that
and the
time
work
either.
that I was doing was really hard and didn't make sense to me. I mean, I was literally trying to sell web development and web page listing to pizza restaurants and chiropractors 4 years before anybody did any kind of online shopping.
It would have been no different than like being on Alexander Graham Bell's payroll and having to go door to door and explain to people why they need a
one
phone.
half of a telephone connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, who am I going to call? Nobody.
Makes perfect sense now.
Yeah, in 1984, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
In 1904, who are you going to call? Nobody. Well, that was what the internet was like in 1994. And I don't feel that old. I mean, I'm still a young guy. I'm not 50 yet. Not yet. But in 1994, like the first email address I got was, I think, jeff@globallink.com. That was the first email address I'd ever had. I didn't even know anybody. I'd never met anybody who'd ever had an email address, except maybe my stepdad because he worked for Silicon Graphics, Rick at SGI.
Well, they were all internal emails.
And it was all internal because routers, Cisco, I think Cisco built the first router in 91. So you couldn't even really send email other than across campus unless you had an ISP.
Yeah.
And AOL was just starting to get... You don't even know what that sound is, do you? The sound of a dial-in modem on a phone line?
Oh, I thought it was the sound of a car going really slow.
That feels like
It was slow, I can tell you that. So 1994, I get some learning. I read some books. 1995, I started going to church. Christopher got me to go to church. Thank God he did. Started reading the Bible, and I started to uncover a position, not the only position, but a position of where we came from. What is the story of creation and the relationship between humanity and the Creator? And I started to believe in myself a little bit more. And I started to read the Bible, and I started to spend time in prayer and meditation. And I started to craft this concept in my mind of dreaming. And when I was talking earlier, if you're a parent and you're not out dreaming your kids or helping your kids to dream and put pictures in their mind of who they want to be and what they want to do and what they'd like to accomplish, they're going to look somewhere else for mentorship. And we have lots of great people around my kids. My kids certainly have mentorship outside of the house, but their mom and I try very hard to make sure that we're encouraging them to pursue the things that they want to do, so that because we love them and we want them to be successful, but as a result of that, they don't really have to look super far outside the house or outside of our close circle of friends to find people that are going to mentor them. And I ended up having to look outside of my own parents' circle to find people that could mentor me, because I wanted to do stuff in my life, and my parents didn't really do anything that was impressive to me. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I was born. They kept me from dying. I'm so grateful that they got me to 18 or 19 before I was on my own. But beyond that, beyond just the basics of a tiny house, a couple of junky cars, a trip to Hawaii on credit cards that they fought about for like 2 years afterwards, staying in a tiny bungalow on the beach and eating groceries that we get at the supermarket. We couldn't eat restaurants. We couldn't rent a car. There was no golf. It was basically poverty on the beach for a week that they fought about on credit cards. Like, that was our lifestyle. So, not that I'm not grateful, but there was I wanted more out of life than that. And Christopher showed me a way to recalibrate my thinking through biographies, books on tape, Tony Robbins, all that stuff. And he was it for me. He literally handed me on a silver platter the key to the door that would become what's now almost 30-year career in technology sales. And this is after dropping out of high school, doing correspondence courses, finally getting my high school diploma, 1 year of junior college after high school graduation, and that was it. And I'm on my own, and I have to figure it out from there. So I think when I met you, I went from kind of knowing where I wanted to go with a couple of years of reading books and some religion in me, some book reading in me, and some Bible. And then I met Jessica, and Jessica was like, let's do it now. I want to do it now. I want to be millionaire. Like, let's do it right away. Why
Does
wait?
that sound like me?
Let's get it done.
Get it done? Does that sound like me?
So Jessica just, I was already on fire, but you were the unlimited fuel supply that allowed me to keep burning and keep going and driving. And I guess that's good for part one of the story. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. I think
got
that...
married in 90 days.
90 days.
And she wasn't even pregnant.
The OG 90-day fiance. But
so that was my life before Jessica and before church. And I guess we can come together for part two next week.
Yeah, I think that it's important to mention that, it's not easy going from having limitations to being able to believe that you can live a life without limitations. It definitely takes renewing your mind. It takes reading. It takes doing, like Teddy, when you have an idea, you're 11, you have an idea of something that you want to do. And some of those things that you want to do, you're going to have to wait to be, like, you might want to drive a car, but you're not 16 yet, so you can't. And so there can be some frustration. There can be some natural, 18 for you. There's natural tension there that says, I want to be here, but I'm only here. So what do I do for the next 5 years? Or if you wait till you're 18, what do I do for the next 7 years until that I can come of age? I can step into that. And so what we've learned is during that time, if you can spend it reading, if you can spend it dreaming, if you can spend it visualizing, eventually that thing and the time will come and you will be the right age and your environment will line up with the vision that you've had. But there is stuff that you can do in the interim. And what you can do in the interim is pray, read, dream, study, put good things in, and surround yourself with people who believe. Big part of Daddy's story that you wanted to hear about, and that you made sure to mention to us, was Uncle Christopher, because he was in that waiting period before Dad getting where he wanted to go, and he was encouraging him the whole time that you could do it. So association is extremely powerful. Visualizing and meditating is
and
powerful.
Association, just for those viewing, association in our mind is who you spend your time with.
Yeah, show me your friends and I'll show you who you will be. Or
Something like you'll be a collective kind of middle ground of the 5 closest people you spend time with and the books that you read over an extended period of time. So association, when we say the most powerful thing, personally, I believe that who people spend time with is the most powerful force outside of the Word of God itself. And the Word of God and understanding who we are in this universe as children created in the image of a loving creator is incredibly powerful. It was transformative in my life personally. And Christian, right? Believing in Jesus, if you want to get technical about it, what does he believe? I believe in Jesus. I believe in Jesus and I believe the Bible. And I believe that Jesus was risen from the dead supernaturally by the Father in order to cleanse us of sin if we receive him as Savior. Plain and simple. That said, the working out of our salvation, one of my favorite verses is, I think it's Philippians 12, 1 and 2. The King James Version of the first one says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And that's not fear like being frightful of a God that's going to beat you up. It's with reverence and respect and an understanding of your place juxtaposed against God. Work out your salvation in fear and trembling. And then, and I ended up memorizing this off the 3x5 card. The second verse after that, I only have it memorized in the Amplified, is, but not on your own strength. For it is God who is all the while effectually at work in you, energizing and creating in you the power and the desire both to will and to work for his good pleasure and satisfaction and delight. And I love that. It is that our job is to work out that salvation. Jesus died. He saved us. Awesome. Now what? We work out our salvation with fear and trembling, but we don't do it on some form of grit or discipline or habit. We do it based on supernatural power inside of us. That's not our power. It's his power that gives us the ability to work that out. And in part 2 of Jeff's story, and we'll do Jessica's story too, in part 2 of Jeff's story, we'll talk about what working out that salvation looked like. I give you the first half of my life, which is BC and BJ, before Jessica, before Jeff and Jessica, before JJ, right? Jeff and Jessica. And then as we worked through that, as the self-image starts to go up, as your belief level starts to go up, and you actually feel like you can do more in your life, it's like the thermostat in the house. If you drop the temperature down on the thermostat, it might be 72 in the house, but if you set the thermostat for 68, eventually the temperature will go and level out at 68. And the same thing's true. If you raise the bar and say, look, I need to be at $1 million or $10 million net worth or income or what have you, if you set the bar up there and you don't let off of it, if you never drop that thermostat down and settle for not accomplishing your goals and dreams, eventually your subconscious mind will pull your circumstances to line up with what you dream and what you believe to be true about yourself and about your surroundings. So the next half of this, we'll talk about the last 30 years and some of the aspects of the journey of what we've done to kind of round out our family with these 7 children. And Tanya, I appreciate you asking the story about it. I hope I told you the story again in a way that was interesting and that you enjoyed.
Thanks for sitting in our episode with us, Teddy. He was so excited he gets to be on the Jeff Heilman
50% is going to be the only kid that gets to be on twice if you want to be.
Yeah, and we need to.
I'm going to ask if I'm going to be on the other.
You can if you
Sure,
want to.
you can be on part 2, and then eventually, as we watch your story develop, we'd love to have you on and show us what you're doing with animation and all that cool stuff that you're doing too. So. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing, liking, and ringing the bell for the Jeff Heilman Project on YouTube, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, every platform that you can find us. We appreciate you so much and are looking forward to seeing you next week on the next episode. Bye.
See ya.